So today we're going to be talking about spring seeding, the steps that you need to take to get prepared for that project, and show you this new project I'll be working on this spring coming up here in just a few weeks. So this is a new build in the area, but I thought this would be a unique project, show you start to finish what happens when you have to seed something in the spring, because you got a massive amount of soil here. You can't leave it a mud mess for the rest of the year. So here's the steps that I'm going to take to prepare for this seeding. So some things to think about with your spring seeding project. Number one, you need to understand the square footage that you're dealing with. That's going to be first and foremost the thing that you need to get out there and do, is measure the area that you need to seed. This is also good for your lawn going forward, so make sure you write down those numbers or make a map, whatever you'd like to do. This is going to be important going forward because everything you do in your lawn, you're going to need to know the square footage in order to properly put down the amount of seed, properly put down fertilizer. Anything that you're going to do in your yard, you need to know the square footage. That's first and foremost. Length times width will give you the area that you need, and write those numbers down. I should mention also, for those of you with warm season grasses, you probably are thinking this whole video is about cool season stuff, but what about us? There is some tall fescue going on down in the south, but a lot of you who have warm season grasses, it's not going to typically be a lot of seeding going on with that. There's going to be sod happening, or sprigs, or plugs. Those warm season grasses are going to spread across the ground on their own if you properly fertilize and mow and do all that you need to do. So that is actually typically the way that your warm season grass is going to be done. And us cool season folks up here do it slightly differently. We can also put down sod, but seeding is a more economical way for us to get a new lawn put in. So for cool season lawns like the ones we deal with up here in the north, the fall time would be the absolute best time to seed your lawn. But what about a situation like this where this build was done, they're ready for seed, or they're ready to put a lawn in, and there's not much of a choice right here? Of course, you could leave it, let it get full of weeds and everything and kill that off and wait until the fall time. But in my opinion, with a situation like this, it is better to put down some seed. Know that you're going to have to likely do an overseed in the fall, maybe even another one the next season after that. Remember that lawns are not an instant fix. But at the same time, this homeowner does not want to wait until the fall time to have at least some sort of grass started, and he understands the process, so that's the decision that he wants to make. Many people are in the same situation with a new build or another project that happens where you need to do this lawn renovation and get it started now. Maybe in a project like this, there's a main area that you want to focus on, and I would say that this is the front yard. It's a large front yard in this situation, but obviously from the highway and from the road, this is the first thing that you see before that magnificent house back behind there. So I talked with the homeowner about that. He doesn't have a lot of topsoil in this area. He did bring in loads of topsoil, but in a large project like this, that doesn't go a long way. So he's thinking about possibly putting down more soil in this area and focusing on this front yard as the main area that he wants people to see at the beginning. That's not to say that we're not going to focus on the rest of his yard, because we will, but sometimes with a certain budget, you might decide one section of your lawn is more important visually than some of the other ones, and those you can work on as you go, but you want to focus your attention on that main area first. So that would be a good time in your project if you want to do some soil amendments, or if you want to try to incorporate something into the soil. That would be a good time to do it now when there's bare soil there and you're going to start a lawn renovation project. So if you want to bring something in like compost, till that in. If you want to change something about the soil and incorporate it into what you have, this would be a good time to do it. Also, something you could do at the beginning, which I would recommend, would be a soil test. Helping to decide what fertilizers you're going to use and where you're at pH-wise in terms of this initial start with this new lawn. A soil test is a quick and easy way to get a sense of what's going on and what you should target for your fertilizers. I just did a video on soil testing and a test kit that you can buy, so check that video out right here. I will have that linked if you want to learn more about how to do that. I think it's an important step at the beginning of a new lawn renovation if you can do it. This is also an important time to make sure that your lawn is as level as possible before you do the seeding. You have one chance here when there's nothing in place to do a really good job on leveling everything. If it's a new build like this, we're going to come in and make sure everything is level and on grade before we put that seed down. This is going to be around a 4-inch tall lawn in terms of mow height, so it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. We're not real mowing or anything like that, but do the best that you can at this point because you have that bare soil there to work with. The next vital step in any lawn renovation project is to figure out your irrigation. Irrigation is going to be added to the majority of this yard, so that's going to take care of that part of the plan. But for those of you who don't have irrigation, there's some makeshift ways that I've done in the past of putting together a DIY system. I'll link a video right here if you want to check out how I've done that. But however you do that, you're hoping for spring rains in this situation. But if you don't get spring rains, you need to be able to supplement that irrigation for the best best results possible. So make sure to be thinking about this before the seed goes down and you realize, oh, I don't have a plan in place for actually watering the lawn. That's going to be a key step in your long-term success. Probably the other most important thing that we haven't even spoken about is grass seed itself. So for cool season lawn renovations that are done with seed, obviously picking the best seed that you can find at the time of putting that down is going to be your best bet. This is important going forward because it's the basis of your lawn. So if you start with a seed that's subpar, you're going to be banging your head against the wall long term of having to add more inputs or trying to get it to look a certain way when genetically you could have picked a better seed and had better results from that seed. So I always stress this, it's the most important factor, something that has absolutely transformed my lawn at home. When I decided to start using elite type seed, everything really changed in terms of the overall look of my lawn. Grass seed of that type is not cheap by any means, especially this season, shortages and everything going on. So plan ahead if you're going to try to get that seed, and also make sure you understand it's not going to be cheap, so you need to budget for that. So which grass type do you choose? I spoke to the homeowner in this situation. One of the first things I asked him was, what type of height of cut do you want? You don't need to be putting in a super low cut tolerant bluegrass or something if the person doesn't really want to do that. They want to mow really tall. So tall fescue works well in this situation. For a lot of people now, if I were putting in a yard that I wanted to mow 3-4 inches, something like that, I would definitely recommend tall fescue. They've come a long way in terms of the cultivars and how they look. Not quite as much of a wide blade as they used to have. And this is my backyard, tall fescue here. It also is fairly shade tolerant. It's not going to be dense shade tolerant, but it will do well under some of these trees here. That's still going to get filtered light in this backyard, so I think that's another good situation for it. If you were wanting a finer texture grass or you're going after mowing lower, then the perennial ryegrass or Kentucky bluegrass is going to be something that you could look at for those situations. You can mow those taller, but I find that around the 2 to 2.5 inch mark is about the highest I like to go on those, and tall fescue does better at the higher cuts. And we can't forget about shade situations. Super dense shade is always difficult to grow grass, so I don't recommend if you have extremely dense shade that you're going to try to grow grass underneath that tree. It might be better to mulch that or do some sort of other landscaping. But if you have some filtered light and you have a pretty shady area that you're struggling with, then fine fescues are actually going to be your best bet. I'm doing this testing out at my new property of fine fescues. You'll see that right here. They're not going to be quite as dark for the most part as some of the other cool season grasses, but has a very fine leaf texture. It looks great. It's just that it doesn't necessarily mix well with something like a tall fescue look. They look very different in terms of that texture. So just so you know that going forward, if you do have a shade area, the fine fescues could be your friend in that situation, and I do have a shade blend available. So how much seed you need to put down is also going to vary depending on your grass types. So the fescues are going to roughly be 8 to 10 pounds on bare ground. Bluegrass is much less because of how small the seed is. That's usually 2 to 3 pounds per thousand, and ryegrass about in the middle at 5 to 7 pounds. So factor that in. That's why you need to know that square footage, because you need to know how much grass seed to buy. So how about covering the seed after it actually goes down? If you have a smaller area and you can slightly rake in that seed and roll it, that's going to be your best seed to soil contact. And then putting something over top of it, just a light top dressing, is not a bad idea either to keep birds away, hold in some extra moisture when you're doing your irrigation. So you could use a compost if you wanted to, you could use a peat moss, you could use mushroom compost. I've been experimenting with that lately. In a larger situation like this, it gets more difficult because of so much area to cover. In a past spring renovation last year, I actually used straw to do that. That worked fairly well in our situation for a large area. I also used straw blankets out at my property last year to do the test plots. That worked well. The absolute best thing in a large situation like this would probably be to use hydro mulch. That gets kind of spendy, but if you were looking for the absolute best coverage in terms of something to hold that seed in place, that would be hydromulch. So how about seed timing? That can get very interesting in the springtime because sometimes you get warm weather and then, like we've been experiencing lately, it goes way back downhill for weeks at a time. So we were up to 70 for a few days, back into the 30s now for highs for a week or so at a time. That's difficult to figure out when your timing should happen. Try to look at your long-term forecast 2 weeks out when you're looking at seeding. Also, you can use a thermometer to go out into your specific yard and take an actual temperature reading. Cool season grasses are going to germinate starting around 50 degrees, but obviously as it gets warmer, the better it will be for getting that germination to happen. This gets to be difficult on timing. What you don't want to do is have that new grass germinate if possible, and then all of a sudden you get a really hard freeze again. I know it's difficult to time out, but that's just the way it goes with spring seeding. So do your best to look at that window of time when the forecast looks like it's going to be on a warming trend. You can get some germination to happen, and hopefully no more freezing temperatures come after that. I know a lot of people get confused as to, I think I'm supposed to use pre-emergent in spring, so can I still do that seeding? No, you will not want to do those two things together. There is one option with a starter fertilizer that has a weed preventer in it. That I used last year in my spring seeding, and that did work pretty well. You can also do this in a sprayable version, so you'll spray this down on the soil when you do your seeding, and it will prevent some weeds. But the thing is that it doesn't last for very long, so it's about 2 to 3 weeks or so where that lasts. It's not absolutely perfect or bulletproof in terms of will some weeds come through that? Yes, but it is an option that you can do to try to prevent some weeds. You can do another application about a month later if you would like to, and then just be ready with your post-emergent control. What I mean by post-emergent is be ready in the early summer when you see some of the small weed plants starting to emerge. If you get spray on that at that point, get things under control, then you should have a good amount of grass there and not too many weeds going into your fall season. Then again, like I said, be prepared to do an overseeding in the fall. This isn't a bad thing. This is actually a good thing that you have some grass started, because when you do that overseeding, it will help to hold that grass seed in place. It will also help to hold more moisture in place. It's a lot easier to do an overseed than it is to do that bare ground seeding. So once you do that initial lawn renovation, you have some grass growing, then the overseed, it's not a difficult process whatsoever. That will help you in the fall time to get that really thick grass going, and something that you're absolutely proud of. So if I missed anything in all of that today, please leave a comment down below. This project should be starting in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.